Hello and good morning, friends and neighbors, and welcome. Happy Monday. Today is July 21st, 2025. And the poem that I want to share today is a poem that's new for me, and it's from a poet who is new to me. I was sort of paging through this Norton Anthology of American Literature, 1985 to present, and you can see how big of a book this is. And this is the shorter ninth edition. And as I was paging through, I came across this poet named Amy Lowell, whom I had never heard of before. And she only has 3 poems in here, but when I looked her up later, I discovered that she was a lot more prolific than that. So she's someone who, at least when you study kind of a survey course of American literature, often gets lost in the cracks there, as opposed to someone like, say, Robert Frost or Emily Dickinson, who has, 24 poems in this collection. So I did just a little bit of background research on her because I was interested in her and curious about who she was and what sort of life she lived. And I don't know a lot. I'm still learning, but she was from Brookline, Massachusetts, and was a pretty successful business person. She had this quote I read that said, "God had made me a businesswoman. I made myself a poet." So it seems like she was very successful in business and then wrote poetry and supported and patronized other poets as more of a vocation. She also wrote a 1,300-page biography on John Keats, which is just astounding to me. And I'm really curious to see if that's still in print or in circulation. I just would love to page through that. But she saw Keats, the argument of the book, I'm told, is she saw Keats as a predecessor to the Imagist movement, which is something that she was very conscious of and dedicated to in her time. She laid out 6 rules for Imagism that I thought were interesting as a sort of precursor to her poem that I'm going to read today. So very briefly, she said that Imagist writers should 1. Use the language of common speech, 2. Create new rhythms, 3. Allow absolute freedom in the choice of subject, 4. Present an image, 5. Produce poetry that is hard and clear, never blurred nor indefinite, and 6. Finally, most of us believe that concentration is the very essence of poetry. I really love that rule 6. I think that's something I'm going to be thinking about a lot today. So with that short introduction, I'm going to share with you her poem that's called September 1918, but it was published in 1919. So here goes. This is September 1918 by Amy Lowell. This afternoon was the color of water falling through sunlight. The trees glittered with the tumbling leaves. The sidewalks shone like alleys of dropped maple leaves, and the houses ran along them laughing out of square, open windows. Under a tree in the park, 2 little boys, lying flat on their faces, were carefully gathering red berries to put in a pasteboard box. Someday there will be no war. Then I shall take out this afternoon and turn it in my fingers, and remark the very taste of it upon my palate, and note the crisp variety of its flights of leaves. Today I can only gather it, and put it into my lunchbox, for I have time for nothing but to the endeavor to balance myself upon a broken world. So when I first read this poem, I really enjoyed the imagery of the first stanza, but nothing in it particularly grabbed me. It sort of lulled me into a kind of peaceful reverie of, the afternoon, the color of the leaves, the trees glistening, the sidewalks shining. The first 3 images in there are pretty consistent with what she says in imagery of presenting direct images. And then she begins to go into metaphor with houses laughing. And right after the metaphor, then we get the image of those 2 little boys who are living kind of a almost joyfully naive and ignorant existence, just gathering these berries. Um, and she's going to borrow that image as a metaphor in the next stanza when she turns from a kind of joyful reverie into a more melancholic longing. And the part where the poem really struck me and had a kind of blunt force impact was right where the stanza breaks, and it says, "Someday there will be no war." Not only is it a pretty abrupt change of subject, but it's a pretty abrupt change of tone. And all of a sudden, then, for me, the context of the poem and the longing of the poem was cast in pretty sharp relief. And then she has an extended metaphor for about 4 lines, um, where she's talking about the afternoon. She never names it specifically as a fruit, but I think we can borrow from the previous stanza about the boys gathering berries that she's thinking about kind of a delicate, fleshy fruit being this afternoon, and the ways that you can kind of turn it around and remark upon its taste, right? But she knows that now it's not something that she can fully experience for its beauty. It's something that she just has to kind of stow away in her memory and hope that she can fully enjoy it later. And I've really lingered long over these last 3 lines that I'm going to read again, because I think that they're extremely powerful as a conclusion, but they also speak to the sense of a certain powerlessness that a lot of us can feel in a world that is wrought with so much strife and so much war and so much violence and anger and disregard for others, that a lot of the time you can feel both powerless, but sometimes maybe guilty for still experiencing joy. And there's a kind of internal or spiritual balance that's involved there. Here's these last 3 lines. "For I have time for nothing but the endeavor to balance myself upon a broken world." And again, I think just for, that speaks to me, and for a lot of us who are aware of things that are going on but may not be as directly affected as others. Maybe we're not living in a war zone. Thank goodness. Our experience is kind of closer to what the speaker's is here, where she's not directly involved in World War I, but those things take a toll in a different way on people. The knowledge that there are others in the world who are suffering and who are not getting to spend moments like she is in the afternoon with the trees watching these innocent kids. And so she becomes cognizant of that near the end of the poem. And there's a longing as well, right in the middle with that line that someday there will be no more. So those are parts of this poem that are going to stick with me today, connected with her last rule of imagism of believing that concentration is the very essence of poetry. So that's the poem for today. I hope that it bore some fruit, if I can borrow the metaphor again for you. And maybe Amy Lowell was a poet who was new to you as she was to me, or maybe she's someone who was a favorite of yours, but she's one that I'm definitely hoping to learn more about. And I'm going to hold on to these glimmers of hope she gives us about the reveries of small experiences we have, and the hope that's contained within that line that someday there will be no war. I wish you all peace and have a lovely Monday.